Welcome, everybody, to episode 12 of the Community Cloudcast. It's now June in Texas, and boy, don't we know it because it's awfully hot here. And when it's hot in June, that means it's going to be hot for the rest of the summer. So we're in for a boiler this time. So I am happy to welcome you all to this segment of the Community Cloudcast. Just a reminder that this happens every month on or about the third Thursday, depending on guest availability and when we all have time in our schedule. We kicked it back this month for scheduling purposes, but you can always catch us on our YouTube channel. Link is on the slide here, and on Facebook for our pre-recorded or after the fact recorded segments. So join us every month for that. I'm joined this month by our special guest, Don Kirkham, Microsoft MVP and developer extraordinaire. Don, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, but I'm trying to stay cool because it is definitely hot.
It's
not even noon, it's already 100. Yeah.
I know, you got that nice pool and cabana in your backyard. You got the setup.
Yeah, we do, and we're using it already.
Yeah, I imagine so. Unfortunately, my fellow co-hosts, Jason and Paul, aren't able to join us this week. They're both traveling out of town. It is summertime, so lots of traveling happening at the moment. They will be back to join us next month. And we have some cool new announcements coming soon as well for additional things that we'll be doing on this channel that our main man, Don, will also be a part of. So keep an eye out for that. Want to thank our sponsors, of course, Aptigent for being our primary sponsor. We haven't released anything new in a while. That's because we're working on some back end things, moving some things around, making the buying experience smoother and easier and whatnot. So a lot of back end activity, a lot of churning beneath the waves, but we've queued up some new updates coming to Power Platform here very soon. Once all the back end stuff is done, that'll put us over 100 actions in the Power Tools suite. And then we'll do a big update for Salesforce as well later in the year. So stuff is happening and new things are coming out. Keep an eye on the website at aptigent.com for that. So with that, we'll jump into our news segment with Jason and Paul being gone. I didn't want to try and talk intelligently about Power BI or Salesforce since I know very little about either one. So I'm just going to go into the Azure news here. A little bit of a slow time, as is per the usual, coming to the end of Microsoft's fiscal year. Build has already happened. Ignite has already happened. So it tends to be a bit of a little slow news cycle. But a few things that did catch my attention. One we've talked about in the past with the improvements to the Azure firewall and front door with new WAF policies coming online. They now have GA the firewall manager, which is not really a new service offering. It consolidates Azure firewall, managing your WAF policies, and the DDoS protection all into one interface or one blade in the portal. So if you play with it in preview, you can manage all of those from one central place. With Azure firewall, of course, and Azure front door being different and distinct things, but you have your WAF policy that you can attach to front door that acts as a layer 7 firewall for your applications. Some much needed improvements there, as we talked about, I think last month or the month before. And if you haven't used the DDoS protection standard in Azure, it's pretty good. Sits at the front or the edge of your service infrastructure. And does what it just says on the tins, try to perform DDoS attacks. It's got some good reporting and whatnot in it in the portal, where you can see the metrics of when you get spikes in traffic and where it thinks those are coming from, and real-time remediation and stuff. So it's a pretty cool offering. If you haven't used it yet, you can now access that in the Firewall Manager in your Azure portal. Another announcement that I saw that caught my attention was the Azure VMware solution. And you think, well, I can run VMware on just an Azure anytime. And that's true. But they now have a file storage solution directly integrated. So you get the top level performance out of VMware. If you've worked with VMware in the past, say to host your SharePoint farms or whatever, applications that you might be hosting at the enterprise level on VMware, it's picky about its storage and its IOPS and its performance. They specifically have a NetApp files solution for VMware that optimizes the performance. You get a VMware native, I'll put that in air quotes, solution on top of Azure, which is pretty cool. When you think that inside of the Azure stack, you can run, you can take your existing VMware VMs, move them directly up into the cloud. I think what does VMware call it? vMotion? Is that what they call moving VMs around? I forget. But
so,
you can move those up into the cloud, pretty much directly lift and shift from on-prem like you can with Hyper-V. So it's nice to know you can do both without having to convert the format. Another new offering is around cost management. This is an area where a number of vendors over the years have popped up to help do cost management in the cloud. Microsoft has their own offering for cost management. Whether it's better or not for your use case, you'd have to check out some of those offerings in cost management as well. But they now have real-time alerting on cost management anomalies. So when it sees a spike and costs of a particular resources that you've identified to monitor, you can get notifications that costs are spiking. Could be the result, for example, of a DDoS attack, or maybe it's something that you were potentially planning for, not quite sure when it would hit. Maybe a new release that you put out waiting for adoption or what have you, or maybe it's tied to holiday, like holiday sales, for example, or tied in with the market. So when oil prices spike, something happens. Anyway, you can get alerts about those anomalies, whereas before you kind of had to watch the cost management portal to see what was happening, and it was mostly after the fact and get your reports. But now you can set up those alerts for anomalies and get notified. So I thought that was a pretty cool addition to that platform. I haven't played with it much. I started looking into it when I saw this notification. It looks like it's pretty good for keeping your eye on costs that are happening inside the platform, which as we move more and more of our backend infrastructure to be Azure native, that'll be handy for us as well. Don, anything you've heard recently in the Azure space that has caught your attention?
No, not really for Azure. I don't follow it as closely as you do, but nothing that's really jumped up. I mean, I still have a problem seeing the words Azure and VMware that close together. So that's just kind of makes my skin crawl just a little bit.
One thing that's happened in the interim is that Build happened, and I haven't had a chance to go back and watch the sessions from Build yet. But did you attend any of those sessions? What was your takeaway from Build this year?
I was looking more for more of the dev sessions, and there just wasn't a ton of them. And again, a lot of the stuff we're hearing about ahead of time anyway. So it seems like Build used to be these huge announcements that would come out, and now it's like it's already trickled out. A lot of it you've already kind of heard about. So I didn't hear anything like really major. I think you talked about some last month that kind of had popped up, but nothing really that. The dev was a dev box.
Yeah.
So haven't played with that yet, but that looks interesting. Yeah, that looks interesting.
Yeah, that was actually my biggest takeaway from it. I thought, well, that's super cool. You can go into an organization and say, okay, we're going to pre-configure for all of these dev environments. Boom. And there you have them up in Azure and with the automatic turn off stuff and things when they're not being used and whatnot. So it seems like it was pretty well thought through. So I'm actually curious to look into that, see how that works in the real world. But I got the same kind of takeaway. I was looking at the list of announcements. I thought, okay, there's some cool stuff in here, but I didn't see anything earth shattering.
Right.
Coming out of
it. And the dev box reminds me a lot of if you've looked at the like the GitHub code spaces. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious how much of a crossover, because it sounds like it's a very similar type thing, dynamically spinning up VMs effectively to set up your dev environments and doing it all in code. And be interesting.
Well, it may have even been driven
more,
by that, since the GitHub acquisition, that may be where that came from. I don't know.
Yeah.
But a cool thing nonetheless. If that fits for your dev type of environment, the code spaces thing doesn't really work from my perspective for the way that I do code, but having pre-configured dev boxes, here's my one where I do stuff for, SharePoint Online and Teams development. And here's my other one where I do my Azure stuff over here. Seems like a really great idea, trying to keep them all together on one box, especially.
I've been trying since Hyper-V came out. It's like trying to get stuff off of your your local laptop, because like we used to carry these big, huge, beefy laptops, and now it's like you don't need a big, beefy laptop. You just need something that has really good cloud access and just run all your compute stuff in the cloud, in a virtual machine up there, or a dev box or whatever you configure. So
Yeah, which I've done that for
know,
years now.
yeah,
Since we do a ton of Azure work and whatnot. I've been doing that for a long, long time. At least the last 3 years, I've had my developer machine up in the cloud. But
mhm,
trying to keep your node versions right when you're doing the client development, and then occasionally we'll have something come out of left field, and we got to go work on this, a WordPress plugin or something I have to go do, and it's like, oh, this is a total. Oh, I need this version. I'm always in MVM going back and
yeah,
forth and trying to this and that and the other thing. Having distinct setups for the dev machines, I think is really cool. Not to mention the enterprise takeaway of, look, here, boom, you want to get all your dev started? Here's everything, one
right.
pre-configured deal.
Yeah, when
So
I do my
I like
sessions
that one
on
as well.
SharePoint framework, in VM, I can't push that hard enough on new devs. That this will, you can think you can bypass it for now, but you'll come back later and go, gosh, I wish I just would have started using that from the beginning. So the first
Yep.
time you try and go back and update an old project, or try and pull a project out of the cloud that uses a different version of stuff, and now all of a sudden, like you said, everything's in the wrong version, and now you got to go either uninstall it all, or now you install NVM, and NVM makes it easy, especially if you've already configured it once in the past, just to switch to a different, set of configuration files. And which is
Yeah, well,
which is
what
really
tends
nice.
to get me is that you've got all these tools now that they take the lazy way out. Instead of building a tool that installs on multiple platforms, want to say, oh, here's a Docker image, right? Just go take the Docker image, right?
Yeah,
Well, okay, that to me that's pretty lazy. But then I've got Docker images that conflict, and they got all sorts of issues here, and I got to go switch to this one to do this thing out of this tool over to this other one. Drives me nuts.
yeah.
I don't really know that this is progress over the way we did things in Visual Studio,
I
but
agree. The
there
only
you
thing I
go.
really use, yeah, the only reason I really use Docker is, or I promote Docker, is like for SharePoint framework. If you go grab samples out of the sample repo, we've added the configuration for Docker files for each sample. And therefore, if you just need to get it up and running so you can see how it works, and then maybe copy the code somewhere else, it works great. So you don't spend all this time trying to get it running. It's quick to get it running. But
Hmm.
long-term development in a Docker image, for me, yeah, doesn't work real well.
Yeah. But there you have it. That is our opinion. I'm sure other people feel differently about that, but there you
Absolutely.
go. So let's move on to our primary topic today, which is looking at the true costs of cloud computing. Now, this, of course, being a big topic, I thought we'd keep it relatively high level. But one of the reason that we had this topic, so every month we throw around ideas here and say, what should we talk about this month? And we just start talking about the issues we have with clients and whatnot, where they say, oh, we're going to move everything to the cloud. You go, how big's your checkbook? Because maybe that's not such a great idea. Or the classic thing where the C level goes to a presentation by pick your vendor, Microsoft, IBM, AWS, whoever, and we're going to save you all this money, and here's all these stats from Gartner that say you're going to save this and you're going to save that, and you're going to be more efficient, and it's you get to, and what they hear is, oh, we get to fire all these IT people, and then you try and actually do it in the real world. I'll talk about a real world example here in a bit. And you go, whoa, we are spending a ton of money. We didn't
Yeah,
budget for this. How did this happen? And of course, the
absolutely.
vendor, oh, you configured this wrong, or you didn't follow the best practices, or whatnot. So that's how the topic came about. I'm sure Don, you've had client experiences like that where they just,
Yeah,
whoa.
absolutely. Yeah, for every person you thought you needed to get rid of, you need to keep them on board just to keep track of those costs. So, because it's just something. I mean, the key of it is someone's got to monitor this constantly, so you don't get surprised at the end of the month. And when you watch all these demos of cloud solutions, they never show the checkbook at the end of the month. They never show you how much this is going to cost. And I expected, a lot of this ends up coming back to licensing. And so I figured you had a disclaimer somewhere in here about the fact that, we're not licensing experts. And so anything I say after the word licensing, you can just disregard, because I'm just guessing.
Yeah, yeah, right. I do actually have a bullet point about licensing. Yeah, yeah, and the one that always gets me is you want to deploy something and someone gives you an ARM template file or JSON file, and it's miles long, and it deploys this router here and these 7 VMs here and the 6 databases over there and this and that and the other, and oh yeah, just go spin all this up and you have a magical solution. Yeah, okay. And you just started costing me $5,000 a month just like that with your magical
Right.
solution with all these components. So you can do it that way, but maybe not the most cost efficient. So anyway, this is the kind of conversation that if you've been in the trenches doing this for a while, that the cloud is cheaper is a myth that keeps getting pushed. Can it be more efficient? Can it save you operational costs? Yes, yes, and yes. Can it move? And we'll talk about move from capex to opex. Yes, and yes, and yes. And this is a cloud show, and we're promoting the cloud, and we're all about it. But you need to go into it with your eyes open. So I thought I'd start the first slide with some misconceptions or some myths, as it were, about the cloud in general. And we're talking mostly about cloud infrastructure, IaaS and PaaS, but also to a certain degree SaaS as well. When you take into account that SaaS solutions like SharePoint Online will replace a whole lot of on-prem infrastructure, or supposed to replace a lot of on-prem infrastructure, right? That SaaS solution could be a big lift and shift from a lot of stuff you got on-prem into the cloud. And so one of the top misconceptions is that the cloud is just more efficient, that the vendor knows how to run this stuff better than you do, and that they can deploy things faster and they can keep on top of these things. And I think there's a break-even point. And Don, I want to get your input on this. I think there's a break-even point where if you are a large enough organization that you have your own data center, not you're renting a couple of servers over at the colo, like you have a proper data center, or a cage inside of a colo facility, and you have networking administrators, right? If you stratified your infrastructure manager where you have networking administrators and server admins, and people who are responsible for these various tiers. You probably have a SharePoint team and maybe a Dynamics team or whatever, these application silos or that. If you're stratified and have those types of teams in that part of infrastructure, moving to the cloud is not such a clear case of it's more efficient or it's better than it is for small to medium businesses who don't have that level of capability of being able to run it themselves. Because the truth is, in the modern data center, everything is already virtualized. You already have hyperware VM hosts, right? You already have a management stack where you're overlooking everything, and you have software to monitor all these things. So you're basically running your own quote unquote cloud right inside of your own data center. So the efficiency argument, I don't think makes as much sense at that point as it would under that. Don, what do you think?
No, I agree, and because I think there, like you said, all the stuff that goes along with that makes that whole lift and shift thing a myth. So you can't. They look at lift and shift as being for a particular app or a particular set of apps or database, or wherever. But there's so much stuff at a large database or at a large data center, like you mentioned, that has gone into securing that and making it efficient and just making it work. All that stuff still has to be done in the cloud. So, if you move it to the cloud, those same people are going to have to configure the cloud. So, and maybe in the long run, it could be more efficient, but it's going to take a lot of work to get to that point. And so it's not just a simple, just move everything from here to there.
No question about that. And people often forget that you go into to build things in the cloud, and you log into the administrative interface and you go, okay, there's a bunch of stuff I can do. Where do I start? How do I put all these pieces together? Right? It's this big software stack, and you have to figure out how to make all the components work. And if you get it wrong, it's definitely not going to be more efficient than it was on-prem, where you're dealing with physical boxes and whatnot. So I think that's a big misconception. And the second on my list, and these are just subjective. This is just me throwing ideas out. Right? Feel free to add or subtract as fits your organization or your experience. But one of the big misconceptions that, it's faster to get things running in the cloud. We can just spin things up in the cloud and spin up an application. Maybe, because it's
Right.
pre-configured, like I mentioned earlier. Maybe there's an ARM template and you can go spin it all up, or you have a production pipeline in DevOps that goes and creates all these resources for you. Okay, fine, but someone still has to sit down and put all that together, decide what all the components are, get it working, right? Get it tested. Take all the cloud nuances, especially around networking and whatnot, into account, and IP addressing, and you know um, VPNs and point to point and all the stuff that you have to figure out to try and get apps deployed. And then once it's in the cloud, is Microsoft's cloud any faster than Amazon's, or is Amazon any faster than your local colo facility that has T3 backhauls, or faster? Is it? I don't know.
Yeah. The other thing I think that, I mean, I kind of go back to that old saying about, the cloud is just someone else's computer. So if you've set all this up for your data center, for your computers and everything, getting it set up in theirs, it's still got to be done. If you're going to get it all to work, it's got to be done. The other thing I see a lot with clients is with data centers, they're allowed to do what they consider to be best of class tools. So it's not all the same vendor that's providing all these different tools. When you
Mm.
get to the cloud, that becomes a lot more difficult. Trying to mix in different vendors into the Microsoft cloud or the AWS, unless you're doing complete infrastructure as a service and uploading everything yourself. If you're trying to use some of the goodness that some of the cloud stuff provides you, you have to use their stuff. And so maybe they don't have the same capabilities, or maybe it's difficult to set up. I mean, I do see that a lot. Using Azure as an example, there is so much stuff in Azure, and how do I make sure I get all the right pieces configured to make my system efficient and secure and everything else?
Yeah, no doubt. And let's not forget that much of what you do in the cloud is software driven. So that nifty Azure firewall, that's a software firewall. That's not a hardware
Yeah,
firewall, right? All this
absolutely.
stuff to make it configurable and scalable and partition for customers. Some of the networking stuff is software layer on top of hardware that is just translating to. There's a big Cisco box somewhere behind the scenes, routing all that. But for the most part, it's software driven. So they're just running on Linux, usually Linux, but sometimes,
Mhm.
various Unix variants, or a Windows machine. Some of the stuff that's running in Azure is just running on a Windows box, right? That nifty web app that you just built, that you put out as a app service, is just running on a Windows machine, right?
Right.
So it's all, and with all the inefficiencies and everything that goes along with that. So it's saying it's faster is not necessarily true. And your point about best of breed is a really good one, because when you're going with whatever the vendor provides out of the box, you're locked into what they're providing. Well, that may not be the best for your needs, right? I mean, back in my early days of doing network and being a Cisco jockey, I mean, there were cases when Juniper was up and coming as the big competitor, where they just did things better, right? They just had a box that did
Mhm.
better at X, or there was another provider, maybe 3Com made a better ISDN aggregation modem than Cisco did. Over time, the big players kind of bought all those guys up, but there was certainly a period of time where you got, this device for that and this device for that. To a certain degree, that's still true. So you're not necessarily getting best of breed when you go with a cloud provider for your equipment.
Yeah.
That's true.
And a lot of the cloud providers, even if they allow you to use your own stuff, they don't usually make it very easy. It's you have to basically turn theirs off, and sometimes that's not easy to do, or
Yeah.
figure out a way to co-work, to execute using their tool along with the tool that you've chosen.
Oh yeah, that's definitely
And
true.
and the vendors that don't, that are not part of the cloud service provider, they're all going to tell you, oh, it'll work with Azure, it'll work with AWS. It's like, yeah, sometimes it doesn't. Remember, those are sales guys you're talking to at that point. So,
Right. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
So it's
So
sort of
that
maybe
kind of
kind.
leads to the whole discussion about cost. So you end up with extra cost, either trying to make their tool work or trying to convert over to a different tool.
Yep. Absolutely. Another point is around security. This is a big selling point. Oh, we're more secure in the cloud, et cetera. Well, maybe that's true under certain parameters. I mean, if you're letting the vendor manage a large SaaS application. Like there's no question that SharePoint Online or Salesforce or Dynamics in the cloud are undoubtedly more secure than you're probably doing it on-prem, because there's people who are paid to do nothing but look at that, right?
Mhm.
But when it comes to deploying your own infrastructure in the cloud, if you're managing the firewall, it's just as secure as it was when you had it on-prem, right? I mean, you can deploy a
Yeah.
box that does all the OWASP layer 7 rules for a web application firewall. There's lots of them. Plug it into your F5. Get this, get that. They're all out there, but you have to configure them properly in the cloud,
Yeah.
just like you did on-prem. So yes, there's an argument to say Microsoft does a better job at securing database keys and keeping your transactions more secure and whatnot, or Salesforce or IBM or whoever you pick. But when we're talking about infrastructure as a service, that's back on you,
Yeah.
and the expertise of your staff and the capabilities thereof. And if they're not that good or not that experienced, or they just haven't done these type of things before, you're only as good as your people.
Right. No, and I've also watched if you do choose to use something, like for example like using Okta for some verification, two-factor and stuff like that, as opposed to using the Microsoft piece. If there's ever an issue, the vendors all get into a big finger pointing argument. It's like, nope, nope, it wasn't us. That's their problem. And nobody will ever accept responsibility for the fact that there was an issue at some point. And so that's something to keep in mind. Is not that other solutions don't work, but once you stop using the stack that comes with the cloud solution, um, a lot of times the solution provider, the cloud provider, is less likely to join in the conversation when there becomes issues.
And it's definitely true of multi-cloud as well. If you're using some services over
Mhm.
here and some services
Yeah,
over there, you get all the finger pointing, which to be fair, we had on-prem too. But if you're assuming that it's going to be better in the cloud, that really doesn't happen.
correct.
We touched earlier on requiring less staff to run in the cloud, and I always push clients back on this to say it's not that you need less staff, it's you need your staff with a slightly different skill set. They're not going away, right? This myth that the SharePoint administrator, for example, no longer exists. Well, have you looked in the admin portal in Office 365? Right, there are more dials to twist and knobs, and just try and create policy in the Security and Compliance Center and see how easy that is to get away with. Right, you want to manage metadata? You want to go do search? Yeah, okay, yeah. Those individuals that you had on staff just need to be retrained, because you're not getting rid of them. If you do get rid of them, as many people think they are going to, and some do, you're just going to hire other people back at a higher rate than the
Yeah,
people
oh,
you
that's
had on staff.
absolutely true. Yeah, and
So
they need a different skill set, and they also need one of the things that I remind people when they go to the cloud is, if you're using some sort of service provided by the cloud provider, they update the service, and you may or may not have control over where they update the pieces that you're using. And whereas when you're in your own little data center, you have a lot more control over, okay, we're not going to patch this, we're not, we're going to do this, that, and the other. And a lot of times online, you don't have that. So not only do you need that staff, you need that staff that is up, keeping up to date with what changes are coming, and making sure that your environment is ready. Your user may be ready, because it may be something that they can't turn off. It's coming, and you can't change it. And
well, and the
so
other thing that shocks a lot of customers is the that exact support experience you're talking about, because they think, oh, we don't need our help desk anymore. We're putting everything in Office 365. Okay, go open a ticket with Microsoft and see how that experience compares to your corporate help desk. Right? They have
exactly.
you're a minuscule, tiny little molecule in their universe, right? No matter how big your organization is.
Right.
And so, can you get premier support and all that? Sure, you can, but you're not going to get the same level of support that you have at a corporate help desk, where they have an internal customer engagement requirement, and a lot of those people, and they're incentivized to help. Microsoft isn't necessarily incentivized to answer support tickets on particular this thing or the other thing. If it's highly impactful Teams, sure. If it's a managed metadata issue in Office 365, uh, good luck. They'll get back to you. I don't want to
Right.
denigrate Microsoft support, but it's a different experience, right? I've had some really great experience, especially on the Azure side with some of the Microsoft folks, and I've had some, fair to Midland elsewhere as well. But it is a totally different experience, and you will find if you are a large enough user that you need staff just to interface and manage tickets with Microsoft. Someone has to interface and run
Yep.
all that interference and translate that into your own company speak to the user.
And there's definitely tips and tricks on how to make that work better. So you need someone that is invested in that.
That's absolutely right. Especially as you go higher up the tiers, and when you can start to name your own severity levels and whatnot, there's a level of engagement required that your standard end user person just pick you send an email is not gonna know how to do.
Yeah.
Speaking of SLAs, I think this one probably does tip to the cloud in that they are geared to deliver a service a particular way and under a specific set of parameters with less unique type of customizations. Whereas classic on-prem, it tends to you kind of make it yours with all of the things that you do, and so the SLAs are arguably probably better in the cloud. And some organizations don't do well, some do exceptional, but some don't do well at delivering SLAs. So I think that's it for the most part is probably true, but it's not always true depending on your organization.
Yeah. No, I
Um,
agree, and I think, and again, I'm not real familiar with the Amazon services, but I know on the Azure side that they make it really easy to add capabilities to keep the SLAs nice and high. So redundancy and putting data in multiple places and stuff like that. So and it's all done for you automatically. And for the most part, you don't even really have to. In some cases you have to opt in, but after that, they take care of a lot of it for you. And so,
or you can do
whereas
it
if you're doing it
yourself.
yourself, yeah,
Yeah.
if you're doing it yourself on prem, then you got to set up the colos and everything in order to make that work. So
Yeah, not quite so simple to add a region on-prem, right? Um,
exactly.
so now this is a weird one, and I put this in specifically because of experiences I've had that this is only true for some vendors, and sometimes this is a negative. So I'll give you two examples. One customer that I work with, have for years, has an older staff, much older than the average. They don't adapt well to rapid change, right? They learn. You have to train them, right, and retrain them and whatnot. But they're older even than us, and I'm starting to notice myself that I can't respond to change as quickly. I have to stop and think about it. So the old gray matter is less flexible as we get older, and the more we abuse it. And doing SharePoint for 20 years is certainly abusing the gray matter. Um,
Exactly. What
but
little you have
but
left.
that more up to date is a negative, right? That rapid pace of change in the cloud is a huge negative. On the other end of the spectrum, that's just not true for all vendors. So IBM, for example, is a big frustration point with us. They release a lot of their new product for on-prem first, and maybe eventually it gets to the cloud, right? So it's been a huge struggle for us saying, that you've got us in the public cloud. It's 5, 6, 7 years old already. When are you going to update it? Meanwhile, there's 3 more on-prem versions, right? Oh, well, you can go run it in your own container in Azure or whatever. That's not the point, right? The point is
Right.
not buying a SaaS service. I expect it to be up to date. So I think this is true in some cases, but definitely not true in others.
No, I agree. And up to date, like I kind of talked about before, sometimes that involves them making changes that you either don't know about or you can't control. And so sometimes being up to date, it's almost makes the argument for doing the on-prem because it's probably a lower, what's the word, threat. I'm not thinking threat, but the possibility of blowing something up might be lower by going to a
The
smaller operating
risk
system
surface
still.
is
Yeah,
contained
the
because
risk.
you
That's what
control
I'm
it.
talking. Exactly. Whereas you roll something out to a large cloud environment, you can mess a lot of stuff up all at once. And we've seen that. We've
That's
seen
true.
little updates
we,
to Azure
yeah,
Identity that takes out all of the cloud since it requires, or all of the Azure cloud, I should say.
yeah, true.
And
Well, when
so
your air conditioners don't run in San Antonio, all of southern U.S. goes
yeah,
down on Azure, right? Uh,
exactly.
Now, I throw in the last topic because it's a point of discussion that is the cloud more environmentally friendly? Maybe. I'm going to say on balance, probably not, because you're running massive data centers, right? When Microsoft does a stamp, it's all this stuff that's included. A lot of that capacity is going unused at the time as they scale out for bigger and things. As an organization, when you're buying things to put in a data center, you're getting just what you need at the
Right.
time, with maybe a little bit of overhead. And there's a lot of churn and burn in the cloud. I mean, if you looked over, if we could see, if we had the magic X-ray vision and we could see how many um, app services, Power Automate flows, Power Apps, um, uh, Microsoft SharePoint online sites, and Teams are tests that are there sucking up computing power, but are never being really used, right?
Mhm.
It's a lot. I have to think it's a lot, right?
It's a lot
Because
just
make
looking at my own personal stuff. So,
yeah.
because there's so often I'm like, oh, I got to go back and clean some of this stuff. Well, there's an Azure function that I haven't used in 5 years. I did it for someone and then I never turned it off, and so it's still
Yeah,
sitting.
I just went through that myself. I cleaned up a bunch of demo stuff. I had like 50 or 60 Azure web apps that I hadn't cleaned up. I mean, all that's sitting there sucking up compute.
Yeah, and we're two
Um,
people, so yeah,
yeah,
when you
that's
look at
just two
this
of
on a
us.
global scale,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
We may be egregious offenders, but nevertheless, how many Hello World SharePoint framework solutions are out there? Sucking up network bandwidth, calling jQuery, right? A lot.
Exactly.
So easy to use also makes it easy to abuse.
Right.
So I think this argument is predicated around, oh, you have your American Airlines and you have this huge data center and here's your carbon footprint, blah blah blah, and then you move this to a cloud. You get a smaller carbon footprint because it's more consolidated. Maybe. I don't
Maybe.
think I buy the numbers on there, but I know certainly there's a lot of abuse of that in the cloud.
Right.
But again, just our
Kind of
opinion.
like yeah, well, what you mentioned about if it's your data center, you kind of know what your requirement is for expanding, to be able to expand on a moment's notice and kind of build that capacity in there. You know, Azure, Amazon, they're doing it for everybody. So they
Hmm.
have to have massive amounts of growth available, to keep from just overwhelming everything.
Oh,
So
no question, no question.
yeah. So
Uh,
that would be another interesting thing to see in addition to things that aren't being used, but just available space that hasn't been used yet, but it's just available
Excess
waiting to be
capacity. Yeah, it's
used.
consuming
Yep.
power, right?
Yep.
Sucking up carbon. So moving on in the discussion, talking about some of these cost drivers. What are the things that drive cost in the cloud? Because it's so easy to budget for $1,000 a month spend and end up with a $10,000 or $50,000 a month spend as you just keep adding and adding and adding things. So what are some of those drivers that contribute to this? I just put them in some groups in no particular order, but talking about apps, the consumption of those applications. When you create an app, are you deploying it to multi regions, for example? Is it going to be globally distributed? Are you using extra, front door profiles for caching and whatnot? And consuming additional resources. So, all your storage tiers and adding your resource plans and whatnot. And if it's going to be highly available, do you have failover instances? Do you have dev, test, production, et cetera, and deployment slots and scaling them up? Those apps can consume a lot of resources. And if you're not careful, consume a lot of dollars.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, when they start looking at buying some of this stuff, they get into that upsell mode of, they're like, well, do you want to be able to do this? And it's like, well, I don't know if we need that or not. So we better buy it, just to make sure we have it available, and it's like, and like we talked about, a lot of it they're not using, but they're paying for it. So not understanding how to right size for now and still allow you the ability to grow later, I think leads to extra cost up front, which again, the upfront cost, the cost they get at you at the beginning of going to the cloud, those are the ones that tend to be the most shocking. If you do this for a while, you get some sort of spike in one of your apps, and you kind of go, oh, yep, we know that's gonna cost us extra coming up, and let's budget and check it and all that kind of stuff. But up front, I said a lot of people, you know, get in on a free tier or do something like that, and then all of a sudden they have to pay for it, and they get shocked by, well, that's way more than what we thought it was going to cost us. Well, some of it's your own fault. You added a bunch of stuff in there that you may or may not have needed.
Yeah, I can say without reservation that I've never had a client engage me for right sizing before they go to the cloud. It's always after the cloud, and they got a big fat bill, right? Always.
Exactly. Just move. It's like, do you want to move let's move everything to the cloud. Okay, you're only using 10% of your data. You really want to move? Yes, we need to move all of it,
Yeah.
just in case we ever need it.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, can you come show us how to not? It shouldn't cost this much. Yeah. Do what I told you in the
Yeah,
first place,
take
maybe.
it back out of the
Yeah.
cloud.
So here's another one, and this is a big one, and that's storage. People think
Yeah,
storage is cheap. Au contraire, storage is not cheap at all. It may be cheap inside your data center when you're looking at buying, extra SSDs or whatnot. But when you start adding this stuff up in the cloud, by no means is storage cheap. In many instances, I've seen it to be the largest cost factor of the solutions that I'm designing for the cloud. So especially when you get into things that are charged by transaction, those transaction limits, for example, on SQL, look like, oh, we'll never touch that, right? Until you actually get it up and running in production, and you're taking orders, and all of a sudden, you're servicing a million users, and every one of those is at least 50 calls to the database, right? And then
yeah,
those transaction costs balloon, and every vendor does it differently, how they charge per transaction and per IOPS and whatnot. And not only do you have to store it in the cloud, remembering that OneDrive is cloud storage and SharePoint is cloud storage, right? And you want to add more capacity, you've got to buy more storage. I remember doing hybrid search for on-prem in the cloud. And we didn't have enough cloud storage because the indexes go up in the cloud, right? And so we
yeah,
had to go buy extra storage specifically in Azure to get the store via Office 365, but it's in Azure to get where we needed to be just to do search on-prem. Hybrid, we're
right.
buying more storage and backup. All that stuff you got has to be backed up. Look, folks, I probably should put this on the misconceptions. The cloud doesn't back itself up. Right? You are still responsible for backing up your data in the cloud. Some of your SaaS applications might, but Office 365 doesn't, backing that stuff up yourself. So you got to take that into account. Storage
Right.
ain't cheap.
Nope. And again, people tend to put more up there than what they need. And so you just end up paying more for it. And that's, I think this is one of those, you mentioned SQL, that if whatever you're moving to the cloud, if it's not designed for the cloud, again, we think of SQL in our data centers as it's just it's in the rack next door, it's connected via fiber. So every one of those calls to SQL, whatever, it's really fast, and it, doesn't cost me anything. Well, in the cloud, it doesn't work that way. So, the pricing models, are different. So you may get charged by the transaction. And so not being aware of that when the apps are built, oh, it's just easy. I'll just make another SQL call instead of figuring out how do I optimize my calls back and forth to the database to only use the minimum amount that I really need. So, and that's something it's a mindset change in developers that has to occur. And again, so that's another one of those things. Moving stuff from on-prem to the cloud can quickly kind of get out of hand if you haven't designed for that upfront.
Well, one of the things I see all the time is tiers of storage. Someone will say, "Oh, we're going to move our SharePoint to the cloud." Yeah. Okay. Microsoft says it'll cost this. Okay. Let's look at your SQL storage. All right. What tier of storage are you on for SQL? That ain't going to work. Not for SharePoint,
Right.
it won't. Right. Or pick your massive enterprise application. You need to up your tier of storage. Oh, well, that's 3 times the cost. I know. I keep telling you, it's going to be more expensive than you think to do it right.
Yeah.
And to properly size out your storage allocation and the IOPS that you actually need for this application. And
Yep.
you bring up a good point because IOPS on-prem we hardly ever think about. It's there, it's
Right.
fiber connected. IOPS in the cloud, totally different animal, right? You got to pay for that.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
still fiber connected. It's still fast, but it still it costs.
yeah, but you're paying by
It
the
costs
drink.
more than it doesn't. Exactly. So
Because at some point Microsoft has to pay those electricity bills that you're not seeing anymore, right? And that's
right.
costing them a ton of money. Networking, that people always get tripped up on this. Well, routers, firewalls, right? Virtual networks, IP address space, right? VPNs, right? Are you going to do traffic management and bandwidth shaping? How are you going to manage your ingress and egress to make sure that you have good connectivity? Okay, everything's going to the cloud, but you've got a DSL line coming into your facility. That ain't going to cut it, right?
Right.
Are you talking about having to upgrade not just networking in the cloud, but networking to get to the cloud? I remember
Yeah,
when
this is huge. Yeah.
it's huge. I remember when Paul Andrew moved over from the SharePoint team over onto the doing some networking side, and he started doing this presentation. He may still be doing it. I don't know. It was a great presentation on Office 365 networking, and how to optimize for that networking. And most of it was you've got to fix your own networking first, right? You've got to make your connections to the internet faster, more robust, more direct. In order to interface with this highly scalable solution in the cloud. And a lot of people don't think about that.
No, absolutely. The last large enterprise I worked for, we had a big issue with this. And so, not only did they need to upgrade networking in general, but they made some decisions about traffic management that they wanted everything to basically look like it came from one location. So they were backhauling a whole bunch of stuff, even to get on into the local data so they could use a different CASB to check things and then send it back out. And yeah, we weren't anywhere close to having a network infrastructure set up to do something like that. So, I mean, we were basically effectively running everything to the cloud was going to go through our local network. Even if you were going cloud to cloud, it was still going to have to come back through our network. And so it ended up being way more than what they thought it was going to be in order to get that all set up correctly. But that's a great bullet point. You got to fix your own networking first before you can even think about trying to go to the cloud.
Yep. And when you do get up into the cloud, what are you going to use? Oh, we use F5 on-prem. Okay, you can do that in the cloud, but have you bought the licenses for it? Do you have the capabilities to do that? Have you configured it there? There's a lot of moving pieces to that. And when we do actually get to the nuts and bolts of compute, right? You have to put a lot of thought into, okay, we're going to move to compute, but we're going to take these servers that are here on-prem and move them to the cloud. Okay, there's a million choices for a VM. In any of the clouds, pick one, right? Configurations and memory and disk and this and that. Have you done all your homework on that? Do you know what those are really going to cost you? Each one of those, because if you pick the wrong one, you're in bad shape because you're already taking a performance haircut going to virtualize inside of a big software stack like that, right? Have you really sized that appropriately? Have you looked at the different regions? Because sometimes your instances can cost differently region to region. And they may not be available. So a D whatever or a G whatever in US East, right? Where you go to Europe West may not even be available there, right? So or it may be twice as expensive. So you've really got to think about putting this together. And oh, by the way, VMs don't patch themselves in the cloud. In case you still have to maintain them.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's just a server, as you say. It's somebody else's computer, right? You're just running your stuff on it. Well, you're still responsible for that. That maintenance headache doesn't go away. You've still got to do it, do upgrades, patches. All those things are part of compute as a whole.
Right. And the other thing that will sneak up on you is if you don't choose the right size to start with, whether it's too big or too small, how easy is it to change? Once you figure out that, hey, this isn't going to work, it's either too big, and we're paying too much for it, we need to scale back, or it's not big enough. It's like, how easy is it just to move that VM to a different size? And different providers, it's, offer different options, and some of them are pretty easy and they work pretty well, and some of them are a little more challenging. So it's a little more work on your part to make it work. So
there is, and the calculators aren't necessarily intuitive to the way you think about traditionally buying hardware when you're on-prem. It's a different experience. There's lots of other stuff that comes along with it. Is it going to run 24/7? Is it not? Well, I never have to think about that when my data center's just there. Right. But do I need to automatically turn some of these off and turn them on, and managing that can be difficult. And then finally we move into the big box, and you notice my first bullet point on SaaS, licensing.
There you go.
Right.
Not a licensed expert, but it will get you.
Do you really understand? Right. And vendors are notorious, Microsoft being maybe the poster child, for getting you hooked on something free and then nailing you with a big user cost. Right. Can anyone say Power Apps? After the fact. So that thing you're using that looks cool in the cloud may cost you a whole lot of money later. And did you really think, let's just go through a scenario here, right? Just to illustrate. you're going to go to Office 365. I use that example because Don and I know it the best. I'm sure if Paul were here, he'd have a good Salesforce example for us. But you're going to go to Office 365. Okay, there's 37 SKUs or whatever it is for Office 365. Like, which one are you going to pick out of that stack? Okay, now that you picked that, what about the add-ons? Do you use Microsoft Project? Yes, we do. Okay, are you going to buy that? That's more dollars per user. How many users? Are you going to not just have Power Platform, but which licensing for? Do you need the more expensive license for Power Platform? Because I got news for you, you probably do. If you want to do anything significant for it, you're going to need the additional license.
And they don't always. And some of them are. It's all or nothing. You can't say, well, I need 50 users that I need to upgrade the license for. A lot of it's like, no, either everybody upgrades or nobody. So when you're starting, companies of thousands or tens of thousands of users, an extra $15 a month
per user is a lot.
Yeah. Right? And and again, you watch the demos, you watch the everything. Very rare, probably never in a vendor demo do you ever hear the word, this requires a premium license. I've seen private people doing MVPs that do webcasts and stuff will tell you, hey, this requires a premium license kind of thing, but they don't show that to you. And like you said, the CEO sees it and says, I want it, and then someone else has to come back later and say, well, you do realize that's an extra $3 million a month or something, some crazy number, so.
Yeah, well, we want to do Power BI. Great, Power BI is cool. Do you really know how much that's going to cost, right? You're going to add Teams. Okay, what additional capabilities are you going to have in Teams? So you start adding on all these additional things. Yes, I want the whole enchilada, as it were. But boy, can that get expensive. And not only could it be expensive, it's purposely opaque. So it's really hard for you to ever figure out in advance what your spend is going to be, and they do that on purpose. So they can, they're in business to get as much money from you as they can, and by God, they're going to do it.
And if you can find I was gonna say, if you can find a consultant that understands the rule, they'll help you with things like, like I said, at the one company I was at, we were going to the cloud, and we were going to Office 365 and trying to figure out what SKU we wanted, and we settled on E3, but we knew up front when we got to the point where we were going to add basically 2, maybe 3 add-ons, it was going to be cheaper just to go with E5 right across the board. So understanding those different costs and how to so don't just keep adding things on. You may just be able to find a better SKU that actually includes a lot of that stuff, and you won't have to add on to it. Some add-ons are included at higher SKUs. Some of them aren't, like the Power Apps premium stuff.
Right.
So things like that.
And additional costs to factor in are migrating your data into or out of the SaaS solution may require extra tools. I defy you to migrate from SharePoint on-prem to the cloud without using a tool, right? In any enterprise environment, it's just not possible. And then what about your data retention? How much is it costing you to take that data and offline it so that you have it later potentially stored in a different cloud provider so you can move it later? And what are those switching costs as well? If you decide this isn't for you and want to switch vendors, how much does it take to cost? A lot. So all of these things can significantly impact your cost structure. It's not one or two things. There's a lot to think about here. And oftentimes you need more than one consultant to help you with this. I'm not a licensing guy. Don's not a licensing guy. Don't call us for the licensing, right? We're going to bring somebody else in to talk to you about that. I understand at a global scale a lot of the stuff that goes on with Azure, but I have specialties in app services and API management and a few other things that I specialize in Azure. I don't know all the other stuff, right? You want that, like I'll call Miguel or somebody else that we know that does these other things. So sometimes you need, the cloud is just too big, right? Just like in SharePoint, there's your infrastructure person, there's your admin, and there's your end user type of thing. That in the cloud, you need multiple inputs from people to get this right, and to make sure you don't drastically overspend. And if you are overspending, help you to right size that to get the right place. So I just thought we'd wrap up with some anecdotes and some statistics that I found out there. Just did a quick, search for a few things here. There was a good survey. I like this one because it's recent. It's from 2021 from Anadot, who did a state of the cloud costs. I believe they sell cost management software, but I would concur that they say 77%. I would say the majority of organizations I've worked with have been surprised by real world cloud costs, not what's in the proposal, not what you heard at Ignite or what you saw on a architecture diagram. The actual real world cost can be shocking.
Yep. No, I completely agree with that. So and again, you do something as a POC, and yep, it all looks, and you go, well, we'll scale it up and it'll only go up by this much, and it's like it's always more. Always.
And in this case, significantly. So another thing that came from the survey there is that 6 months, 72% saw cloud bills increase 4 to 11 times. That's not 40% to 110%. That's 4 to 11 times of your spend. Now, let's be fair. 2020 and 2021 were rapid cloud adoption, right? As we did this whole remote working thing that nobody was prepared for. A lot of people overspent just to get to the cloud, right? Just to enable the mobile workforce. But I can tell you from experience, Don probably can too, and anybody who's done this for a while, we were seeing that before COVID happened, right? People were being shocked by those costs before this took place. It's just made it more widespread.
Yeah.
I think that one of the points here is particularly salient in that if you make mistakes during due diligence and cloud adoption, you can overspend significantly, and you may be locked in. And that's why I underlined indefinitely on this one. You may get into a long-term contract, like a 3-year or 5-year agreement, and you're overspending and you can't get out of it, or you've structured it so that it's really hard to get out of it.
And I think, it definitely. One of the things that when I was kind of looking at some tips for this is that, talking about reducing personnel, I mentioned before about you need people that are monitoring this stuff. So, you don't want the first indication that the price has gone up to be when you call from accounting and go, what's going on, kind of thing. So you need to be on top of it. And again, so if you see that things are going up, figure out why they're going up, and can you mitigate them? Can you stop whatever's happening from going out of control, or do you have to suck it up for a while and then see if you can renegotiate whatever? But it takes people to do that. I mean, there's automated software that will help you. You mentioned something about the Azure cost management software that will help you if something spikes, and that's definitely. But there needs to be people that are looking at these things on a regular basis to make sure that they're within the scale and scope that you originally thought they were going to be in. And if they're not, being able to give a heads up to the CFO or whoever that, hey, this is coming, so we need to make sure we're on board to keep doing this, or maybe we got to change the way we're doing things, and we need to scale back some of this stuff.
Agreed. And those people also need to be involved in the design phase. They need people who understand the cost structure of what's happening in the cloud. You need to tell them, oh, we're planning to move our ERP system to the cloud. Don't tell them afterwards, right? Tell them before so they can help you right size that properly and go, Or they can say, like you mentioned earlier, hey, if we're going to do X, there's a SKU we can get that gives us X. Or if we make a commitment, we'll get, a 30% discount or what have you. They know these things and can help you appropriately design for that. So cost should be at the forefront of your mind at the design phase of the project, and even in the POC phase, as you mentioned, so that you can, if not, dollar and cents cost, at least resource consumption. Know what you're going to use, know what you need in going to the cloud, so you can have an idea what the impact is going to be.
Absolutely.
Well, Don, we're out of time. No surprise there. Once you get us rolling on the topic, it never seems to fail. So let's just wrap up with a few things. I just put a couple of ideas on here, things you need to consider. Implementation and migration. Think about the services and tools and integration of APIs. Always keep operations and maintenance in mind. You're going to need to manage things in the cloud. Plan for growth and know what it's going to cost you to utilize the services that you have. Make sure that your budgets are realistic. Like they're just not pie in the sky, or you're not just looking to try and go with the lowest number. Get actual stuff and see what, for some organizations, moving things from capex to opex is a win, but sometimes it opex is attached to revenue numbers, and sometimes it throws off your finance accounting. So you got to think about this stuff in some organizations. And then two things we'll leave, get some final thoughts here on. Does it really belong in the cloud? Right? Do you need to do this, or do you just want to do this? Right? Could it be hybrid? Will it run hybrid? Does it actually all need to go? Sometimes I'm not sure it all does.
And at the very least, it doesn't all need to go now.
Mm.
So maybe scale back. It's like, these are the critical paths that we'd like to get there, because we do see the benefits in these particular things. But there's other things that be nice to have, but really, if we don't have the budget for that right now, or maybe we want to go put some of this in the cloud and then see what the actual cost is, not be so shocked, and then decide when we want to put the rest of it there. So yes. So does it really belong in the cloud? It needs to be done at more than a grand scale. It needs to be done at an individual piece to figure out, each piece. Does this piece, will it benefit for us putting this in the cloud?
Well, they say there are a few guarantees in life, right? Death and taxes. I have another guarantee. I'll give you. You can take this to the bank. If you go back to a vendor to renegotiate your deal and you want to spend more money, they will renegotiate it 100% every time, right? So it's okay to start small, right? And then come back and say, we want to spend more money. They're going to take your call, I assure you.
Absolutely.
And one thing that's worth consideration, and I used the Dropbox story because it jumped out to me here. That's why I put it on a bullet point, is sometimes you move to the cloud and that didn't meet your needs. So in Dropbox's case, if I remember the story, that the details that I saw was they went to the public cloud, and that was costing them a lot of money. So they pulled back to a private cloud. Still cloud, okay, still not running inside their data center, private versus public. But it saved them a ton of money, 75 million in savings. They doubled their gross margin because they took it off of public cloud infrastructure and put it into a controllable, which is really just having your data center and somebody else's infrastructure, right? But maybe that's something you need to consider. You started on the public cloud with this thing that you're building, whatever it is, and at some point maybe you go, let's pull this back into our own private cloud instance that maybe makes it more affordable, or maybe even bring some things back on-prem where they make sense, because it's just more affordable.
Yeah, and I think same thing for the does it belong in the cloud? The different, because in that particular case, it was cheaper to do a private cloud. A lot of cases, it's more expensive to do the public cloud, because there's more security tools and stuff that have to be applied to that. And so, figuring out, what applies to this particular thing, and then making sure, if you can go with the cheaper option, will it meet your needs? And if so, do it. Public cloud sounds great, for being able to get to your stuff all the time. But yeah, is it worth the extra money to do that? Maybe not.
Yeah, and let's be clear, we're really talking at an enterprise level here. It's almost always cheaper when you're a small organization to go to the cloud, and more efficient, and unlikely you would ever bring that on-prem. But you have the staff, the expertise. When you know how to build all the pieces, there's no point in having someone else build it for you, right? And so I don't say that's a leading option, but it's definitely an option. And for some organizations, shifting how that cloud is deployed makes a lot of sense. All right, so a few things we want to wrap up here. Of course, events that are upcoming: European Cloud Summit coming up in Mainz, which is just outside of Frankfurt, Germany. Absolutely beautiful town, right there on the Rhine. It's phenomenal. One of the most beautiful cathedrals I've ever seen in Europe. Fun town, great food, good conference center. 26th or 28th of September. I will be there. Lots of the folks that everyone who listens will know are going to be at the European Cloud Summit, and it's a great event. So you can register now. Prices go up on July 1st. Get registered now, and even at the price of flights now. Remember, Cloud Summit and Collaboration Summit are community events, so the per ticket price is cheap. To get there, it in some cases cheaper to jump a flight to Germany than it is to pay for one of these bigger conferences just for an admittance ticket and still have to travel to them. So don't let it put you off the distant Germany. Frankfurt is an easy airport to get to. It's an easy town to travel in. Right from the airport to the there's almost a train that goes right to the conference center. It's just a few kilometers away, so it's easy to get to. Great event. If you're preferring to stay onshore, of course, there's the North American Collaboration Summit coming up in October. So a couple weeks after that one in Branson, Missouri. Many of you are familiar with that. Be a great event. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to make it to that one this year because of my travel schedule in Europe. But
yeah.
it's a great event. But you'll be there, right?
Yep. Yeah, I didn't get picked up for ECS, but I'm going to NACS. Yeah.
There you go. So that'll be a great event in Branson, right on there in Branson Landing. Mark always has cool stuff planned for that. So that's a great event. I want to wrap up again with thanking our sponsors and, of course, our other shows that our hosts are responsible for, Jason's Bifocal show and Paul's user group that he runs here in town. Paul does a bunch of community stuff over in Salesforce side, as well as still doing some of the Microsoft stuff with us. So be sure and go and check that out. Those are your options. And a big thanks, of course, to our special guest, Don Kirkham. Don, thank you for joining us this month. Appreciate it. And we will see all of you next month. Take care.